Okay, so I think we're back. Hopefully folks are watching us here at the new location on YouTube. You're watching an open conversation. This open conversation is Walking Wounded, and I'm here with Teresa Pasquale. Hey, Teresa. Also, another leadership team member, Kathy Escobar. Hi, Kathy.
Hello. Good to be with you guys.
Oh, and introduce us to Phyllis.
This is Phyllis Mathis, my friend and co-collaborator, therapist, life coach. So we're happy to be here. We're in Arvada, sitting in my office, and ready to have this conversation with you guys. We're really passionate about this topic.
All right. Well, real quickly, I just want to Transform Network. We are a network that mobilizes, trains missional practitioners and people of faith, and drawing from the deep well of their faith to make the world a better place. And share about we have kind of four main legs of the table that is the table of love and justice that we all come around at Transform, and one of those is called Justice Church, or Justice Church Initiatives. Another one is contemplative activism. We do a lot of this. We also work with missional community, amazing missional communities like the Refuge, where Kathy her ministry. And we also engage everyday people in group processes around public theology. We think that we should together. So that's just a quick rundown on what Transform Network is. And I want to introduce anyone to Teresa who maybe hasn't come across Teresa Pasquale yet. We're really lucky to have Teresa as a forum. She has brought so much of the contemplative activism that is really framing out how we do justice at Transform, with her influences from Richard Rohr and James Finley and just all the mystics. She's words. And I am very lucky that I'm going to get to walk parts of the El Camino in Spain. We've got to start announcing that. That's happening now. Yeah, so at any rate, really happy to have you guys here, and I'm going to pass it over to Teresa to kind of get us into our content around Walking Wounded tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for that introduction, Holly. It's been a pleasure to do the work with Transform, cultivate language and context for contemplative activism and what that looks like in the world. And you're right, we are officially walking the Camino, so we can officially say it out loud now. And need to start walking. So I'm really glad to have this conversation with you, Kathy and Phyllis, knowing somewhat, seeing the journey that you've walked in talking about this work, doing this work in the world, writing about it, blogging about it, and sort of that kindred space that we hold doing similar context work around her, and to be introduced to Phyllis and your work and where that's kind of consonant as well, to be able to dialogue about the places people are hurt in their soul and the places they are hurt in their faith spaces, context of real suffering and trauma, and also begin to carve that road, that pathway to healing for people. And I know, Kathy, your background and work, particularly with co-pastoring the Refuge, as Holly mentioned, a very eclectic community in North Denver with more than a few Walking Wounded folks in your midst. And also the ministry over the years, just generally pastorally caring for people in that community, but also really the soul, so many that sort of have come to your door, ended up in that space with you. And your work really helping people journey through the hard life and in their faith, and helping to facilitate people getting that sacred through your training as a spiritual director and your writing and work on all of that at which is a great blog that really walks that journey and talks about it for people that want to engage with that process and that dialogue. And then, Phyllis, I'm so glad to be introduced more to what you're doing. Hearing that you guys were going to do this Walking Wounded course together, this coming course, I think is so necessary. And coming from a similar lens, at least with your history as being a counselor, also a life coach, similar fields, you know, as I sit in as a clinical social worker and trauma therapist, and your history that crosses over with the evangelical and charismatic part of the Christian church, serving as lay leader, interim pastor, elder, and a variety of other roles with context, and carrying sort of the tension between those worlds, it seems like, with your work falling into a space of being able to help people as a counselor, as a life coach, who have had that hurt from abusive systems of faith or just disillusioning systems to work through their spiritual construct. So I think there are two great people here to have this particular dialogue with, and to help people begin to just create language and context for this true hurt, and give space for it to be validated as authentic, I think is important. Holly, are we on now, or are we going to do that later on in the dialogue? Okay. What I'd really love to start with is, although we've heard a little bit about what both of you ladies are doing in the world of faith and healing, personal context, or what drew you into doing this work, and really dialoguing about it from your different professional and personal lenses.
Want to go?
Okay. Well, from the beginning of my work as a counselor, evangelical Christian people, and so I did my internship at a Christian college, and I started working at a Christian halfway house. And so the bulk of my clients are going to be mostly Christian for the first 20 years of my practice. And so from the beginning, I started working with people who had been hurt by church, and we didn't even have the language, even spiritual abuse didn't really come into the vernacular till 1990 something. And so but I was definitely working with people who had been abused, or had been in repressive, or who were just struggling with their own faith, really wanting to be free but really couldn't because of their belief systems and things like that. And occasionally I'd come across someone who had really been messed up at church by leaders, or by, you know, any number of things that can happen when you're part of a system that you sort of give yourself to wholeheartedly. There's all kinds of things that could happen. So I ended up doing a lot of that work anyway. And then as I was in church leadership as well, I kind of had a feel for how leadership worked, and how lay leaders operated within the church, and all of the things, that mishaps that can happen when you're a heavily invested volunteer. So it just seems like, I don't know, I was made for the job. I just kept collecting people along the way, and then as my own disillusionment and deconstruction happened in my own faith for many different reasons, I was crashing, burning out, and trying to figure out who am I now. And it just seemed like when you're working with people and you're going through your own, like when you go through a piece of your work, it's like a big magnet opens up, or the beacon goes out into the world. So I looked back and realized that at least 30% of my entire practice was working with people who had been wounded or disillusioned somehow in their faith or with their church system. So I just sort of owned what I'd already been doing, and then started thinking about, how do I help people? What would I want someone to have helped me with, basically? So that was the question we were asking, like what would have helped us? So that's me. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. It just feels like it was in my blood.
The personal and the professional kind of cross over in that place that makes it into a place where you can feel feel the pain and suffering of others because you felt it yourself, and also that space for others.
Well, and sometimes it's like the hardest part is it's like I wish we didn't have ours. I wish we weren't having this conversation. I wish so many of the things that we talk about all the time we weren't talking about in our own life and in the life of so many people that we know. But we are that.
Yeah.
Because out of big church, crawling on my knees. I'll tell you a bit about that in a second. A mutual friend who's also a therapist. I intersected with her in some other weird way. I didn't even know her, and then we had coffee, and I was spilling my guts out, and she's like, "You need to meet my friend Bill." And the truth is that we kind of crashed into each other, and that was 2006. And in different ways have just been healing together and then journeying with other people who are healing together. But my story is a little bit different in that I was never in the profession of counseling. And I was not raised at all in a Christian family. I was from a very wide, kind of crazy, open family. And looking for rails, I was looking for boundaries. I was looking for something to help me navigate my confusing life at home. So the reason I say is that I went all in on Christianity, like all the way, because it was to me to have something to hold on to. And in my family, I was a really good girl. That was who I was known for. I would always do good, Angel Kathy. And so it worked super good in my Christian faith. Like every rule I had from my family totally applied there. And I always joke that I kind of like rose to the top of what it means to be a good Christian through kind of working really hard to put a good face on the outside. And then inside I was kind of dying in all kinds of ways. Just shameness and insecurity and all that kind of stuff. And but I always just kind of battled, tried. But I met this group of women, and this is years that started talking honestly about their real life in church on the side, and it kind of shifted something for me way back in almost 21 years now. But ever since then, I started bumping up against the system back then, expressing my real feelings. I started telling my real story and saying things out loud. Finally made my way to a church staff I didn't mean to, but a big job at a big church, care pastor. And I think what happened to me is I just found this place where I loved the work that I did, and I was so excited to be part of this thing, and it was like almost like the culmination of so many things of healing and recovery, and I just saw the system in a way that was terrifying, really, in terms of an unhealthy system. My master's degree is in management, and so like every unhealthy system thing in the system, but it was like this crazy disconnect because I was doing healing ministry, working with people whose lives were being transformed, finding community, finding connection and healing and all these. And then I was in a system that was just a big hot mess. And so it was a weird thing to hit it, but it was like everything I believed about everything started to come apart. Kind of walked away from the table, really, and started crawling on my knees to try and find a new path.
Well, that's a good time, I guess, to make some sacred connections with people that understand dark nights. And I think there's a number of misconceptions, and maybe come back to other ones or whatever. But for me in my work there was this sort of within systems, a very large caricature of the faith in anything, or they grew up or were raised in this, hedonistic culture of. And the truth is, and for me, coming from a place of having a deep sense of indwelling of God in myself from a very early age, and then being disappointed by the replicate that, the closer you get to the system, the inner central place, and you can see the system is just broken, because all systems are systems in some way, shape, or form. They're not going to be perfect. But to see that brokenness and not see reflected in it the face of the God that I knew indwelling in me. It was really strange for me when I started to have some to see the stigma of people, that those with inside structures, which hopefully is starting to break down with more people like yourself and myself talking about it, or less people, you know, and I've tried to explain that it's a place of deep heartbreak. Like, you don't get upset and walk away from something you don't care about. You know, I've known plenty of people who don't care and they just stay in the pews. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't matter whether I'm here or I'm not. People walk away from me that the woundedness is so deep because really their yearning for some is so deep that it's a heartbreak of the worst kind of breakup ever. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you speak a little of how you're describing that feeling, that sense of that brokenness.
Well, Brisa, the people who don't care really have got it the best. I mean, they don't suffer. They might be bored, but they don't suffer. It's the ones sacrificed and the ones who have invested everything and then been treated badly or been disillusioned. When that starts to happen and when that finally collapses, it can be extremely traumatic. And so and I was really personally shocked by how disorienting that was together. I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know what all was wrong. I was clinically depressed. I was angry as hell. Felt like I was falling apart. And I was kind of toxic to my friends and family. Or sort of my reaction or my disease, if you want to call it that, really did measure, in a sense, the commitment that I came in with. And it had been 30 years, 35, I guess, since I just dove into the church and various aspects of leadership and all my passion and all my identity and all of my future and all of my purpose was going to be in helping people within the church and helping the church. And so when the church broke my heart, it broke. I can't really describe that in any other way, and it sounds so weird. So a lot of my flailing, spinning around, wondering what was wrong with me, surprised me. But as I talked more about it and as I worked with people, I started realizing people are traumatized. They're symptomatic. They're depressed. They're anxious. They've lost their purpose. Their lives have kind of collapsed, and it's a serious thing, only it feels weird. Mm-hmm. So when you're out, someone else is talking about it, you just think there's something weirdly wrong with you because no one really died. So, but it's a death. It's some kind of major spiritual collapse. And so it's a life-altering process. And I can't say that strongly enough, but that was like the biggest thing that was surprising to me is how intense it was and how powerful it was, how hard it was to put lever.
I think really owning that is one of the hardest things to do, and one of the most helpful is to go, this is people that haven't experienced it or don't care in the same way, or not, whatever, aren't affected the same way. For those of us that haven't, it's so much about what you said. It's like we were all in. I was, this day, after all this time, I still am like, I can't believe that happened, and then yet it wasn't really. Sometimes it becomes about one event, one event tipped me over, but it was a long string of things for so long, and so things I just kept pushing down about gender inequality, about us and them, and caring for the poor, and all the divide, so many things that I tried to just kind of push down and be part of. So it wasn't about that one event, but when you get an outside perspective, because I have a lot of friends that there are different faiths or have no faith in the way of, and they really are like, wow. It's like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Why don't you just get from the table and walk away? Go. And it's because they don't understand kind of that deep all that we do, because it's gone. Our spiritual self, and our spiritual self is no small thing. It's like our core.
It's core, yeah.
It's our core, and so really, when it gets violated, it's so messy.
You know, you guys are describing it so well, that heartbreak, the pain really of relationship. You know, it's a relationship to, on so many levels, you know. And I've talked about it as, you know, so there's the cosmic relationship that is forming within the institutional relationship, and there are all the relationships to the people in that community set as well. And so the heartbreak happens, there's a multitude of levels and tiers at which heartbreak happens. So it's like a really difficult marriage, but it's one that includes far more than just one other human being. It's like you said, it's just this all-in feeling that slowly, little by little, these things kind of chip away and make it really hard to, and I think also that structure, it makes it hard to walk away. Like you said, just naming that I'm having this feeling inside of a system in which a person having this feeling because no one else is saying this, which I think is important about these kind of dialogues. You know, that there are so many, that every construct hurts people, no, you know, and what you're doing, Kathy, you know, with the refuge is an example of a construct created to heal, you know, to repair some of that woundedness. But people that are inside those constructs still and are afraid to name it, you know, are afraid to feel it.
In the class, so much is about grief in the Walking Wounded class, is that out the system part. You know, when we start losing beliefs, like things that were either system or, you know, not even all the way, sometimes it's not even like that, but things that we used to hold really dear and they start to fall away. Structures, because structures are built beliefs. And then when you lose structures, you lose relationships and friends. That's been one of the hardest parts for me. Just lose, you know, it was family members, you know.
Like family.
Yeah, and it's just, things change. And once you lose beliefs and then structures and relationships, we lose our identity. A lot of us, not everybody does. Us lose our identity. And it's like, who am I apart from all the things that I was attached to, all the things I was known for, all the things that brought comfort, all the ways that I was protected really in that system, and it boosted me up. And that identity part still to this day is really complicated for me. I do live kind of in both worlds in a different way. And the refuge is definitely a very eclectic, you know, the healthiest community I've ever been a part of. It's a weird animal, but I am still pastoring. You know, I am kind of still in a system, but I'm not in this other bigger system that feeds people I know that are part of it. And it's weird. It's just a weird law on not being able to be connected to often to things that so many other people are. A lot of people are doing fine in the systems that we aren't in anymore, and it's lonely.
I think it's so important for people to know that that's a piece of it. You know, that there is loss in it. You know, there's parts of it you love. There's things that you lose, like that wider community context. And I think naming that loneliness is so valuable too. You know, that you may have left something that was hurting, so in leaving, that it's like you said, it's that strange kind of paradox place. Phyllis, is there a way that you bring that piece into the counseling context with people around that church hurt experience?
Framework of grief, but specifically with losing the structures, but also what happens inside. Free fall, or you're losing your sense of certainty or your sense of security at a really deep level. So all of these things I think are very acute. So when I have someone who's either been in a really nasty system and they feel a little bit crazy, then just talking about what they said, what I used to believe, how many years I stayed in it, you know, I hear lots of things like that from people. A sense of betrayal, bewilderment, and this deep angst, like am I doing it right? Am I doing something wrong? Fear is really a deep issue for a lot of people because even evangelicals have a lot of strong beliefs and a lot of or else's to them, you know. So when you start breaking belief rules and breaking out of theological constructs, if you are or feeling betrayed by people you were supposed to look up to or submit to or whatever, it's disorienting and scared. So just hanging on to them and giving them permission to feel whatever it is they feel and kind of being an anchor is biggest part of what I do. I don't, you know, I just kind of nod and say and what language on what they're feeling, and just give them permission just to feel, because that's another one of the things that we have rules about. We have theology about feelings, and then when we're feeling outside the lines, holy crud, how scary is that? So a lot of fear, a lot of sorrow, a lot of anger, and then guilt about anger, and then shame about not belonging and flunking out or being kicked, or whatever. So just being able to help people say those things out loud is a lot of what I do, and a lot of nodding. You know, just a lot of the best thing, because when you look at someone in their eyes and they're saying something really scary, and you're going, yep, I get it, yeah, and this besides, that's probably the biggest healing agent there is.
And saying stronger words than crud.
Yeah, saying stronger words than crud. How to swear. Yeah, I am happy how to say the F word.
Women, you do not swear. You say crud.
And,
I just didn't know what the rating was here.
And I really like how you said theology of feeling. This idea that feeling itself has been given depending on what you're feeling and what you're not feeling. And that, it goes along with the language, right? The linguistic piece of what you can okay with you feeling and God's not okay with you feeling, you know, based on our context, based on our rule set. And people unpack that's an intense place to go. It's unpacking layers and layers, and for some people a lifetime, depending on if they grew up in that constructing system. So it's deconstructing every piece, every fiber, you know, in many ways to reconstruct a totally.
So true. And the feelings thing, I mean, it's not just hard related to, you know, wondering how God feels about us in those moments. It is people around us have a really hard time tolerating these big feelings. And so that's a huge thing, is that, you know, you feel it. That's why I love recovery groups so much, because no crosstalk. Because, you know, you get anxious, and part of that practice, thank you for sharing, and you move on to the next person. But most of us came from a culture where someone shares a hurt or a pain or a struggle, and oh my gosh, look out, everyone jumps in to try and solve it, fix it, move it, books, DVDs, you know, anything to make it work. And I know that's why a lot of people go underground on this. That time they bring it up, someone tries to fix them. Every time you bring it up, when are you going to stop being so pissed off at the church? You know, every time you bring it up, you know, you're getting bitter. You know, all the different things that happen when we're just actually, some of us, feeling the feelings that we've never felt before. That can never happen to us in terms of our healing, but the world around us often doesn't know, depending on the structures we're in.
And I felt kind of toxic to people. I mean, my major emotional tone for years was I was just furious. I was just angry and frustrated and snarky and sarcastic and furious. And so, I felt like I had Tourette's, and there were just certain things that made me so reactive that I didn't fit for human consumption sometimes, you know. There were just certain meetings I couldn't be in, certain songs I couldn't hear, certain words I couldn't hear, and I just felt like I was, I gave myself permission to be really angry. So one of the ways I'm tough for some of that is I tell the walking wounded people, so about as angry as the person can be, and the limit on that a lot. And I feel like I have a big space to hold a lot of the anger and and frustration and injustice and betrayal that bring into the process.
Even just what you're describing in that sense, from the trauma counseling perspective, right? Sounds like trauma triggers. You know what I mean? This song, this word, that there are real things that become triggers for people. I mean, there are certain words that stick. It's very like believer or saved, just to name a couple things that had carried such a heavy weight of what they meant when they were said. And I think, there's going to be more need for this dialogue. Sadly, like you said, Kathy, it's not like, oh, great, there's space, like we need to have these spaces. It's sad that we need to have these spaces, but it's also beautiful that the spaces are now finally being able to be crafted for people to have, because there are more people that are going to need this. This last week, at least in my Facebook feed, there was all this stuff about the new Pew research that there's Christianity and the demographics in Christianity in the current context, and more, of what demographically people have said, people, that have been studying context, evangelical, but also main traditions went way down, lost a few percentage points, I think, this time around. And just the fact that it's just speaking to not just the need, but also people that are actually looking for those other spaces now, that there needs to be those sort of bridge builders, kind of the work that you guys are doing, that I try to do, and people are seeking it out. I constantly, and I'm sure you guys have references to this, talk to me and say, where can somebody find, a therapist that understands church hurt? Where can somebody find a spiritual through this? Because whatever construct they came from that hurt them is, like you said, isn't the place that can hold it necessarily. And so what are your thoughts about what we're going to kind of need and the space that needs to be filled? Moving into people showing up in the world and saying, I need this help. It needs to be the response.
Everyone needs to take our class.
It helps. I mean, it does help to be with people. So I think that's why, that is one of the reasons why we created it. We actually did a live event at the Refuge. We partnered. It was Phyllis and I and Carl, who co-fosters the Refuge too, and I can't remember who else, a couple other people. I think laughter is like a really big piece of this, to be honest. It's serious stuff. There is something really healing. Just in some ways the ridiculousness of some of it, and we cried, and we had these grief stations on. Every plate got broken at the anger station for this live event that we had. About 50 people there, men and women, and you could go out and throw plates or cups, and it was a great example to us that people needed a place to share. So that's why Walking Wounded Online create really great groups, and they're doing amazing work.
Yeah.
Holding the space to just let people be, to not fix, to not edit, to not do all kinds of things. But sometimes there's so much angst that it's like everyone bumping into each other and more wounding happens. And so we keep seeing that in general. I see it in different places, in different little pockets live too. Then everyone's rubbing up against each other and not really getting that space to cover a longer period of time. So I don't know what it all looks like. The Pew studies and some people's reaction to it, sometimes it's kind of hard for me, because I think a lot of times the first reaction is, how do we fix the church so that we can get these people back? I think that's hard. That's just hard for me because it's the wrong question. So many, not everybody is wounded. I mean, that's kind of the specialty of this particular course and a lot of the things that we do. But sometimes it's like your faith just outgrows the system that it was in, and then you can't find anymore, and then that's lonely and disorienting. And so there's so many things about it. I think there's a lot of danger in just trying to find quote unquote safer churches. Because, and I say that as one that's tried to be part of creating one, and there's a high value for it. It is a safe place to come wherever you're at and all those kinds of things, but we're not doing it to sort of make that happen. We're actually doing it because we were desperate enough to, we just needed to be together. And so I would say the way somehow to be together with some other people.
Well, we didn't try to start a church like you guys did. When we left the church, there were people who came to us and said, "Well, can we start our own? You should start something. Can we do a home church?" And my first reaction was, "Are you kidding me? Like we are infected. We're infected with something, and we're carrying the disease. So until we get it out of our system, why would we start something new?" And I guess I have this really strong, and being as old as I am, and watching the whole movement through different phases and different things, lost its soul somewhere, lost its way, quit being about the thing that I signed up for and gave to, and started about some other things when I was working. And so then I was always trying to, get just like you were thinking that the church really wanted people to and recover from and have better lives, and it was a shock to find out, no, we're not really interested in that. Kind of the crux of that for me. So the thing I was going to say was, when we crawled out of church, we couldn't stand meeting for any reason except to drink margaritas. Did an informal margarita fellowship once a month on a Friday night, and just hung out and bitched and laughed and did naughty things. And that was a hugely healing kind of act.
I remember when you guys were
I think you guys are articulating a couple of really important points for people. One, that another way than keeping the system going, right? So what you were saying, Kathy, about this idea that these Pew studies come out and everybody's like, okay, what do we do to get people back, kind of thing? Or it's, what do we do to hold it, because what if we lose anything else? So I see a lot of this, like, circling the wagons phenomenon, which does the very opposite. How are we going to retain our finances to make sure what's in here stays exactly how it is? We can't lose anything else, or this this subset, this denomination, whatever, everything that pushes people away, which is, people are not looking for community experiences. And so we create so unfortunately the systems have a really hard, and has been my hard time, even sort of being at the fringe of system and mainline, understanding that push-pull, and for me at least, I always, doing the lay minister stuff and doing the therapy stuff, I need my foot far enough out of the system that I don't rely on it for my sustenance, for my sustainability. Because what I notice is once that becomes a reality, you can't help but become part of the self-preservation system, because that's my medical insurance and it's taking care of my family, and you just can't not do that in some way, shape, or form. So I think it is important to name that, sadly, is the opposite of what's going to keep people finding faith communities within their constructs. And then also naming that there's no distinct way to find community. It might be Margarita Fellowship, and for other people it might be, like even with the church sort of community that we created, my husband and I, was kind of like what you're talking about, Kathy. Like, we wanted to sit in a room with people that, at least it was for us, it was spiritual sustenance for us. Like, let's create a space that feels safe for us, and then maybe more people will show up, and we can all just kind of do the thing that we wish was happening, in the system construct. And I think the other important point that you pointed out was that, all these people, and there's that book, I think it came out in the 80s, Hurt People, right? So there's a lot of also people bumping around in the dark, hurting each other, trying to find healing, that are hurting each other again. And I have seen that to be another phenomenon. So I do think, contexts like The Walking Wounded and some of the, book, you guys, Kathy, you worked on, and I've worked on, and to create just some content for people to know that there's freedom to find your way, and also to find safety, or to find a place where it can be sort of a real life-saving station. There's, I don't know if you guys have ever heard, this is a little story Richard told early on when I started listening to him, and I thought it just stood out in my mind. So there's this shoreline along the coast that goes for miles. And this life-saving station starts to get built because they realize all these ships are coming, nowhere for them to go and nowhere for them to get help. And so a bunch of people get together and they build this life-saving station. And they start